Welcome to Proof of PR, your passport to the world of public relations for Bitcoin and Web3. I'm your host, Kelley Weaver, CEO of Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy in our unique industry. Get ready for an inside look into the future of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship from those driving innovation in the space. Join us as we learn how they generate headlines, cut through the noise, and grow their brand awareness through media placements, press mentions, and thought leadership. These are the stories behind their success. This is Proof of PR. All right, today I am joined by Isabel Foxen Duke, who is a business development and communications advisor for Ordinals ecosystem projects. After managing press for the Ordinals Protocol, which makes digital collectibles or NFTs possible on Bitcoin, Isabel continues to work with the Ordinals Core team as well as a variety of businesses in this rapidly evolving new space, which I'm excited to talk about today. Before shifting her focus entirely to Bitcoin, Isabel ran marketing and communications campaigns for Web3 clients such as Decrypt Media and the Definity Foundation, and previously ran an online education consulting company in the wellness industry for 10 years. Welcome, Isabel. So excited to have you today.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. We've gotten a chance to jam offline a bunch at this point, and I'm like ready to go deep today.
Me too. This is such a fun story. I'm so excited to tell it. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear what your entry point into Bitcoin was and what made you fall down the rabbit hole.
Oh man, you're going to like this story. So I actually very, very randomly came upon Bitcoin. So I had a finance background like well before my marketing days. When I first got out of school, I worked at a fund of hedge funds really, really early on for like a year and a half, 2 years. I grew up in New York City, had a finance family, everyone in my family worked in finance. So I had that kind of like base education, but I had pretty much abandoned finance. I hated traditional finance culturally, right? I was like, this sucks. I don't want to be here. Ditched it, went the other way, became a life coach, got into the wellness industry, learned about online marketing. And then many, many years later, I mean, this must have been, well over 10 years later, like around the time I was transitioning out of my wellness business, I went on a Hinge date with this random guy. And we started talking about politics and finance and economics. And he sent me a Raoul Pal video. Sometimes I lie and say he sent me a Michael Saylor video if I'm talking to like hardcore Bitcoin maxis, but it was a Raoul Pal video. I have to say, it was a Raoul Pal video.
We have you now on the record telling the truth. So.
Exactly. But it was a Raoul Pal video, and Raoul Pal, problematic in some ways, but pretty reasonably bright macro person, I think. And like basically just explained the basic problem. No one had ever explained the basic problem of fiat to me before, right? Like I'd felt it personally for years and years. I mean, I remember thinking, relative to my peer group, I'm super successful. I make good money. Why do I live in a rental 1-bedroom in San Francisco at the age of 35? Why is my success not able to afford me the kind of lifestyle that it was able to afford my parents on a relative basis? So I sort of, I personally kind of felt the effects of fiat as sort of like a millennial. I think we're really the first generation to really, really, really feel it and kind of see the effects of the fiat system on our lifestyles. But no one had ever explained to me why. I didn't really get it. And Raoul Pal, he explained it to me. He was just the first person who happened to explain it to me. And I fell down the rabbit hole, became completely obsessed with, I would say, Bitcoin YouTube, but it wasn't just Bitcoin YouTube. It was sort of like the anti-fiat, macro YouTube was really what I got into. That was sort of my entry point. Everyone has kind of a different way that they kind of view Bitcoin, I think, initially. And mine was definitely through the macro lens. And then it took me, I was probably just sort of like, milling around on YouTube by myself for about a year and a half before I made the transition into working in this space professionally. And that was really when I started to like kind of dive deeper into the technical side of things. That's when I was really called to learn about how blockchains actually work, what a blockchain actually is, what is the technology that supports this supply cap that makes it so different than the fiat system. So that's how I got into Bitcoin.
Are you still in touch with this person that got you into Bitcoin?
Yes. I mean, I remember I was, it was a very brief little moment. He came into my life. It was maybe 2 or 3 months he was in my life. And I think of him as this angel that just gave me Bitcoin, and subsequently my whole career shift. But yeah, we're still friends. And I tell him the story every time I talk to him. I'm like, oh my gosh, LOL. I still to this day tell people that you're the reason I'm in Bitcoin, and he loves it and we laugh about it. So yeah, we're still friends.
Love that. And then your first job in the Web3 ecosystem was at Decrypt, right?
Yes. So that was, kind of like a lucky break in some ways, because I really got to learn about crypto press, which I hadn't had as much experience with press in general. I hadn't had as much experience with PR when I was sort of doing my traditional wellness kind of influencer marketing background. That was really very focused on email marketing and social media marketing, and organic growth marketing was really my focus for the 10 years prior to that. So, getting a job at Decrypt was sort of this opportunity to learn more about the press. And then that ended up being kind of my focus for other clients, started putting me on press-related engagements in crypto. And so that sort of, I think, really rounded out my my communication skills in a way that was set me up very well for Ordinals, which we'll talk about. But yeah, that was kind of lucky because it was just a skill set that I didn't really have. And so it was another tool that I could put in my toolbox after, 10 years of digital marketing vibes.
What exactly were you doing at Decrypt?
I was interim head of marketing. So I was I was a consultant. I was working as a contractor. So I wasn't sort of, technically full time with them, but I was sort of de facto helping them strategize around different market areas of their marketing, different things that they needed to market. They were working on putting out various different products and services at that time. I think they still are. I'm not as in close touch with them at this point, outside of just the publication. So they were working on something called Decrypt Culture Club, which was sort of a membership style club that they wanted to market. They had a few different kind of product marketing ventures that they needed help with. And so I kind of helped them with strategy. And we also did quite a bit with them with email marketing. That was a big focus of mine with them very early on, was sort of helping them really make sure that their email marketing was optimized as well as it possibly could be. That was a huge focus of mine in my previous career, was email marketing and the power of email marketing, which I still think to this day is highly underestimated and underutilized by most companies. So that was what I was doing at Decrypt. I was there for, I want to say 7 or 8 months, and then transitioned to mostly working with the Dfinity Foundation, which is a layer 1 company contributing to the Internet Computer Protocol, was doing kind of broader communications work for them. And, sort of in the background of all of this, while this is all going on, I was sort of desperately trying to get into Bitcoin. I really, really, really wanted a Bitcoin job. And they're not easy to come by. It was hard to find the right fit for me in Bitcoin. But yeah, that was sort of as I was doing these work for these other companies, that I think ultimately did really teach me amazing, kind of the skills I needed to get to Ordinals. I was developing these relationships in Bitcoin, including Casey Rodomore, who is a Bitcoin Core developer in the Bay Area where I live, and we became close friends. I never thought that, I would work for Casey. He, from the very beginning, from the first day I met him, was talking about this idea of how you could put NFTs on Bitcoin. But it was very conceptual. It kind of felt like it was it was a project that he was working on by himself in his spare time. I didn't really think much about it other than just, of course, thinking, oh, Casey's such a brilliant genius. He's just, spouting off about all of these things that you can do with Bitcoin because he knows so much and he's this brilliant dev. But it never really occurred to me what was about to happen, when he actually released this protocol. In retrospect, I'm also really, really glad that I got a chance to work at the Dfinity Foundation, because I actually had some experience with protocol communications, which is pretty unusual in Bitcoin, right? There's not as much technical development happening in Bitcoin. Communications jobs at that kind of level in Bitcoin are pretty rare. So, my work with Dfinity kind of set me on this like perfect path to end up doing communications for the Ordinals Protocol, which is what Casey launched in February, and which I think, kind of changed the world.
Agreed. I mean, I think back just this past year to Pacific Bitcoin, which was in November of last year. And Michael Saylor was on stage talking about how the crypto ecosystem has all these great ideas like NFTs and DeFi, and Bitcoin needs to embrace these ideas and bring this technology to Bitcoin. And then, cut to February, this explosion, kind of explosive announcement that changed Bitcoin, I think, forever, happened. So yeah, you talked about how you met Casey, but tell the story of how you kind of got roped in full time to Ordinals.
Casey was again, like just a dude doing this in his spare time on the side. He loved it. He was passionate about it. He'd been talking about it for as long as I had known him. But he's a singular person, right? This is a huge undertaking, huge ambitious undertaking for one person to build on their own. This massive, life-changing, world-changing protocol on top of Bitcoin. Arguably, the most influential technical development in Bitcoin since Bitcoin itself. And I mean, Casey is brilliant. He was a core developer. He's a brilliant genius. But I just no one really. I certainly didn't anticipate this happening. He was just a friend. He was doing this for fun. He was doing this for the love of it, not for any kind of business gain necessarily. He has this great quote where he talks about Ordinals being like his love letter to Bitcoin, like just this thing that he created for, the beauty and art and love of this thing that has given him so much in his life and that he cares about so deeply. And he'll be the first to say, Bitcoin is what really matters. Ordinals is supposed to be for fun and beauty and joy. Bitcoin is the thing that really is going to save the world and kill fiat, hopefully. But he wanted to celebrate Bitcoin. He wanted to create an art project around Bitcoin. And so he created Ordinals, this protocol, this ability to share art on chain on Bitcoin. Similar to NFTs on Ethereum, but completely different technical mechanism. And so he released Ordinals in a few different stages. So the first release of Ordinals was the Ordinal Theory Protocol, which is the ability to track Satoshis, right? Use the sort of layer 2 is what I call it. That's controversial, but I kind of consider Ordinals like a layer 2 that enables you to track Satoshis and sort of essentially make Satoshis non-fungible. And that launched, I think, in December. And I remember when that happened, it was kind of exciting. Some people were talking about it on Twitter, but it was still mostly our friends. It was still mostly, kind of Bitcoin people talking about it. Not the Ethereum degens hadn't rushed in yet. And then in January, he released this feature of being able to attach data to these trackable Satoshis. So being able to attach an image, for instance, to a Satoshi and then watch it be transferred across the network, essentially. So now you can move JPEG data, just like NFTs, around Bitcoin's blockchain natively in this very, very simple and elegant way that no one had ever really thought to do before. I mean, I think he certainly had influences, but no one had ever really pulled this off the way that he has. And that happened in January. Inscriptions, aka the ability to attach JPEG data to Satoshis, that launched in early January, I believe. And that's when really things started to get crazy on Twitter. And Discord. I wasn't in Discord. I wasn't paying attention, but I was certainly paying attention on Twitter. And all of the sudden, the movement and the chatter and the buzz and the excitement around Ordinal started to pick up on Twitter. And I was in communication with Casey, and he said, there's 20,000 people in our Discord. 20,000 people in our Discord. These are like mind-blowing numbers. This is like one of the largest Discord servers in the world that just organically sprang up around this thing out of nowhere with no press, nothing. And The press at this time, I mean, I don't remember, I hope I'm getting my timeline correctly, but I remember there was this point where I started to really realize what was happening. The sort of underground movement on Twitter was building around this thing. And the press hadn't gotten a hold of it yet. I mean, there hadn't really been much press around it.
Who are the types of individuals in the Discord and on Twitter talking about this at this point? Is it other Bitcoin Core developers? Is it what community?
At this point, the degens had gotten involved. At this point, the degens had started to figure out what was going on. And that's when people started trading inscriptions. And that was sort of the hint to me. It's time to tell the press. Why is the press not talking about it? There's JPEGs trading on Bitcoin for actual money. It was hard to prove that they were trading for money because everything was peer-to-peer. There was no marketplace. You had to run a full node in order to engage with this protocol at this time. The Discord was largely people coming into the Discord trying to get help to learn how to run Bitcoin full nodes, because you had to run a Bitcoin full node in order to run this client, this Ordinals client. And so in order to trade Ordinals, in order to trade inscriptions, in order to like get in the degen game and like start trading these collectibles, you had to run a Bitcoin full node. So you had all these Ethereum degens who are obsessed with trading, right? Trying to figure out how to run Bitcoin full nodes. It was like a conversion event where all these Ethereum degens were coming in to the Discord, and the moderators in the Discord and the Ordinals Discord were amazing. You know, there was this livelihood happening in the Discord where, you know, everyone was just like wanting to help each other, and everyone wanted to help, you know, teach each other. This is how you run a Bitcoin node. This is how you download the Ord client. This is how you run this. This is how you run that. It was like a mass orange pilling event. It was probably the largest and fastest orange pilling event that has ever happened in history, if you consider running a full node like proper orange pilling, which many people would say that it does, certainly in the maxi community, right? So this was insane, absolutely crazy. You have like mass rushes of Ethereum degens coming in and downloading and running Bitcoin full nodes for the first time. And learning about Bitcoin, right? Just learning about Bitcoin for the first time, getting excited about Bitcoin after thinking, you know, Bitcoin is the boomer coin and there's nothing you can do with it. So I remember, you know, calling Casey on the phone and saying, okay, he's like, they're trading them for money. I'm like, where can we get evidence that they're trading them for money? I'm like, somebody better, how do you, like, we need confirmation that these are trading for money, because I'm going to write a pitch and I'm going to send this to the press. And he called his friend, who I'm pretty sure this is public information, so I can share this, but it was Raktoshi, who is probably the most prolific inscriber and kind of most, I would say like most influential collector, not just inscriber, but collector probably in the entire ecosystem now. At the time, he was just a friend of Casey's who just kind of like got in early. And Casey called Raktoshi and said, you know, will you, you know, I know you're selling these for for money. Will you like tweet something about a sale? Will you like confirm that a sale has happened? And Raktoshi, like 10 minutes later, tweeted, Ordinals Rock sells for 2,600 USD. These Ordinals Rocks are now selling around somewhere between 5 and 10 Bitcoin a piece currently. At the time, they were going for 2,600 USD. So,
which at the time was like 1 Bitcoin, right? Ish, or less?
No, it was like a tenth of a Bitcoin, less.
Oh, 2,600, not 26,000, right? Yes.
2,600.
Okay.
So they have 50x'd since then. These rock collectibles have 50x since then. I mean, they are arguably kind of like the most well-known. They're now like this major historical collection. Ordinal rocks were basically just a copycat. I mean, they were not even, I don't even want to call it copycat because it was like a joke. They were just ripping off Ether rocks because they thought it was funny. They were like, oh my gosh, LOL, in the early days of Ordinals, LOL, let's put the Ether rocks collection on Bitcoin. And that was technically the first inscription collection ever on Bitcoin. Now, first collection ever on Bitcoin, this has also become a little bit controversial. Now there's like a previous early inscriber named Bitcoin Shrooms who was inscribing these mushrooms as independent inscriptions. And there's sort of now a claim that maybe that was the first inscription collection on Bitcoin. We don't know. See, there's so much mythology and lore. It's like a whole, like, who was the first collection? What was the first inscription?
Either way, this is still early days. This is we're only talking about 6 months ago. It's not like this is a long time ago. But I want to talk about this pitch. You contacted Casey. You got the tweet from Raktoshi. And then how did you tell me about how you finessed this for PR and how you got the attention of the media?
So one thing that was really great about working with Casey is that Casey is not a company. And Casey has no interest in, he doesn't have a need to sell Ordinals. He thinks this was something that was fun and exciting and it was a story and he was into the story. He didn't need me to paper over the problems or paper over the conflict. He allowed me to really tell the press what was going on, which included a lot of conflict and still does, right? He allowed me to really share with them, hey, like there's, max infighting happening in the maxi community. Maxis are upset about fees going up or this and that and concerned about fungibility. And, but on the pro side, we have, Dan Held jumping in and defending Ordinals. And, he allowed me to really lean into the drama that was happening around Ordinals and sort of give the press a story. We talked about, concerns about, are Ordinals, actually creating problems for people in the global South because they're so much more sensitive to fee structures, and are they unable to send transactions the way they want to because, fees going up, right? I mean, we didn't shy away from the challenges that Ordinals poses and sort of the conflict within the Ordinals community. He let me tell the press those things and talk about those things and essentially give the press the real story, as opposed to what most press releases often can look like, or at least the challenge with press releases is how do you make this not look like an advertisement, right? And so this, I call it sort of like the anti-press release. And even when I sent it to my journalist friends and my publicist friends, I put press release in quotes. I was like, LOL, we wrote this press release, right? Because the whole thing was such a joke, it wasn't really a press release. It was more just like, hey, I have a story for you. You might be interested in this ridiculous story. I can't believe this isn't really even being covered. And yeah, I think 48 hours later, it was sort of everywhere. It was TechCrunch, Bloomberg, Cointelegraph, CoinDesk, Decrypt. They all covered it basically within 72 hours of that email. And a lot of them did not get it from me. That wasn't all my connections. They were forwarding it to each other and picking up the story from each other. It was I sent it to whoever I sent it to, and then it kind of exploded.
Just from a press release.
Well, I mean, I think there were multiple. I mean, yeah, I only just sent the press release, but I think it's hard to know how things domino effect, right? It's a story gets written. I mean, we know that there were certainly some journalists who responded directly to the press release, because I got multiple responses immediately asking for comment from Casey and people wanting to interview Casey. So we know that there were people who
did he hop on the phone for interview? Was he
did.
nimble? Okay.
He was initially. He wasn't. Then at a certain point, I think it just became too much, and it was taking away from his ability to focus on building and dev work. And there are still to this day, various parts of the protocol that are not finished, right? There are features that still need to be shipped. And so, at that time, the press became so overwhelming, that it was a challenge for him to manage it. And we had to really, really scale back. So, I mean, that sort of was jumping ahead in the story. But after this press release,
in the first, let's say 2 days, what types of, interactions was he having? Did he hop on the phone with TechCrunch, or are the reporters at this point, it's got a life of its own and they're kind of copying each other's quotes and things? Talk about that.
He was definitely hopping on the phone with people. He was definitely hopped on the phone with TechCrunch. I'm pretty positive he hopped on the phone with Bloomberg. I'm positive he hopped on the phone with Decrypt. I mean, he was definitely hopping on the phone with journalists. He was, people wanted the story. And at that point, Casey still had the bandwidth to talk to people about it. And that was also when it wasn't just journalists. I mean, it was also podcasters. Bankless had him on pretty immediately thereafter. I didn't talk to Bankless, that there was this whole domino effect that happened, and it became a mad rush to get access to Casey. And then that was when we sort of had to start to like set some boundaries around his availability and accessibility. But he was getting on the phone. I mean, anyone that I sent the press release to, he basically that responded. He was very accessible to. He made a point to get on the phone with them and share the story. He loved the story. I mean, he was having the time of his life. He was having a ball talking about this. It's like his love letter to Bitcoin, after all.
And very quickly, you realized that this was something that you wanted to be involved with full time and sunsetted what you were doing previously, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was like, I had been, wanting to get into Bitcoin for so long. This was a dream. I mean, it was a dream scenario. It was a home run out the gate. Very quickly after the press release went out, Casey said, "Hey, I'm not entirely sure what I'm building or what I'm doing here. This is all kind of happening so fast, but I'd love to have you on the team." And so Casey had me come on, and, I worked with Casey for, several months, just helping him manage mostly the press, although I also ended up doing kind of other comms related support, very startup environment, like whatever is needed gets done. Until I think about a month ago. And that's when Casey, sort of made the decision that to kind of take a step back, and he transitioned like effectively leadership of the Ordinals GitHub, so like the protocol development piece of things, over to his previous apprentice who he built the protocol with. But yeah, for those months that he was kind of at the helm, I was supporting him with all sorts of communication stuff, and it was like a dream. It was a dream job, total dream job, in many ways. And like, I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. It was a life-changing moment in my career for sure.
So you mentioned that this story resonated so much and obviously took on a life of its own. Part of that, you also touched on this drama. I'd love to hear, just at a high level, what is the drama? Like, why is there such division amongst Bitcoiners about Ordinals?
I think that is a really like multi-pronged question. I think that there's a lot going on in that question. And so I'll try to answer it in as few bullets as I can, but it's complex. So number one, I think that there were sort of immediate concerns about things, just technical concerns, things like use of block space, things like the fee market, things like just technical concerns about like what the impacts of this would be on native Bitcoin users. So that's sort of like level one concerns. And a lot of those concerns are really like appropriate to have. Like, when things are actually affecting base layer Bitcoin, we should be having conversations about whether or not they are good for the network or not, right? And so those conversations were really great to have. A lot of that was an educational process for people, just like understanding what the impacts of inscriptions are on the tech. The second layer of kind of concerns that there were, I think, were more ideological in nature, and kind of there was a lot of ideological debate about whether or not Bitcoin should be used for use cases other than money, right? And that is an ongoing debate, right? That's happening right now. It's sort of a kind of almost like a moralistic question, right? There's people in the camp who would consider Bitcoin code, right? Who consider Bitcoin a database, who feel that, as long as you're within consensus rules of Bitcoin, it should be used in a permissionless way, any way that the user wants to use it, right? And that permissionlessness is really critical for the health and safety of the network more broadly. Other people have, kind of the point of view that Bitcoin should only be used for money, and that use cases outside of money detract from its like ultimate, purpose in their mind, which is, fighting the fiat disaster machine, right? And so those two perspectives, I think, are still to this day kind of at odds with each other. And then I think like the third layer, the third sort of like layer of debate that kind of like complicates things is cultural, right? Is really just sort of like a cultural issue between Bitcoin maximalists, I guess you could say, and sort of Ethereum culture folks, right? So Ordinals, because the value prop of Ordinals is essentially a value prop very similar to NFTs, right? I mean, it is essentially the same value prop, but just with different underlying technology. The huge numbers of people from the Ethereum community just immediately swamped into Ordinals very, very fast, right? Like they got it. They wanted in immediately. They were having like hot new thing syndrome with Ordinals right away. And so you have like, 95% of Ordinals users, that's not a real statistic, but it's high, right? The vast majority of actual inscription users, traders on a regular basis are people who largely came from the Ethereum community and already had the sort of infrastructure and ideology in place around NFTs. They already got NFTs. They were already collectors. They were already obsessed with NFTs. Like they were in from day one. They didn't need to be convinced about the value proposition of NFTs. Whereas, Bitcoiners, right? Bitcoin maximalists, they don't care about NFTs, right? Like they'd never used NFTs. They were kind of, had a bias against NFTs largely because of its association with Ethereum, that they weren't interested in Ethereum. So you had this sort of weird thing where Casey, who is a maxi for sure, I mean, diehard Bitcoiner, Bitcoin Core developer, Bitcoin to the death, he built this thing for Bitcoiners. In his mind, he thought, I'm building NFT technology that's Maxi approved, right? That Maxis can embrace. That is a true Bitcoin, NFT value prop technology. But what ended up happening in practical reality is that the people who really saw the value of it were Ethereum people. And Bitcoiners had a hard time kind of wrapping their brains around who cares about digital collectibles? Like, why is this valuable? Like, what's the point of digital collectibles, right? Whereas Ethereum NFT collectors, they immediately got the value prop. So, that culture kind of, I don't want to say culture war, but like, I guess you could say there's sort of a little bit of a culture war, certainly between like Maxis and maybe Ethereum folks. That really came to the forefront of the Ordinals conversation. And it is still I don't want to say a challenge. It's just sort of a reality of what's going on culturally within Ordinals, is that you have a Bitcoin only technology that was built and designed by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, where ultimately Bitcoiners are struggling to understand or care about it. And Ethereans are like really into it and really love it because they get the value prop and they have for years and years. So that's a tension that's existing. And I think what the implications of that is that Maxis and Bitcoiners, who this technology was really built for, they are kind of even more digging in their heels in some ways against the technology because they don't want to be associated with Ethereum culture. They don't want to be associated with NFT culture. And so there's sort of this like, aside from rational, logical arguments, there's this sort of like distaste by some of the Maxis for Ordinals and inscriptions because it's so like, it's the community is so like, it's an ETH community by and large. It's mostly Ethereum folks who are dominating the community at this point. So that's challenging. I think that was an ongoing communications challenge for us. And I mean, like, I think it still is, right? I mean, to this day, a lot of what I am talking about with my clients, and I try to focus as much as I can on lifting up Bitcoin only clients in the space, is how do you educate Bitcoiners about inscriptions, right? How do you elevate Bitcoin only Ordinals companies when so many Ordinals companies are not Bitcoin only? I think that's another like one little note that I'll make about this is, because there were a lot of the businesses that rushed into Ordinals right away who had the capital to really integrate Ordinals right away were not Bitcoin only companies, right? It was mostly companies that were having some sort of NFT play to begin with, that were rushing in and had the capital to rush in and build the infrastructure around Ordinals. So that's sort of another hiccup here. It's not just the retail culture, but it's also the businesses that were able to come into Ordinals were largely businesses that had like non-Bitcoin backgrounds, basically. And the true Bitcoin only companies that are developing in Ordinals are super new. They're baby companies. They're brand new companies that are just getting off the ground. So you have this sort of, there was sort of like a power differential right off the bat, right? There was an advantage that these sort of non-Bitcoin only companies had coming into Ordinals right off the bat. And that's something that is still adjusting, right? Like it's very, very new. Like, I hope that more Bitcoin focused, Bitcoin only companies will grow in this space. And I'm also really happy to see that a lot of the kind of crypto companies that came from the Ethereum world, a lot of them are completely disentangling from Ethereum and transitioning into Bitcoin only companies, which is also interesting to see.
I know. It's I thank you so much for that breakdown. And it's interesting that the tribalistic nature of our industry, which I honestly wish it wasn't so much fighting, but perhaps that's how we get where we need to, as you mentioned, like some of that is healthy and some of that is just toxic. But it's yeah. It's where we are. It's what the industry is. And I do think that that's really been magnified over the past few years for whatever reason. This, I don't know, differing opinions about Bitcoin versus non-Bitcoin, which in my opinion doesn't need to be. It should be more like everyone needs to embrace innovation. But what do you think, you coach and advise companies in the Bitcoin only space. And what do you think that Bitcoin needs to do to sort of gain more traction across the board, but also bring in more like mainstream adoption?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that it's interesting. I mean, I think technologies like Ordinals are the best possible, like orange pilling device. I mean, it is like the best orange pilling device that we ever had. I mean, I think something that I resist, but something that is probably true that I hear a lot about from my peers and that I sort of cringe when I hear this, but I think it's probably right, is that like not everyone cares to hear about like macroeconomics and the fiat, machine, right? Like a lot of people just want to have fun. They just want to be entertained. Like they just want to be part of a community or whatever the case is, right? There are reasons. Everyone has different value systems. And like diehard Bitcoiners, they have a very specific value system that's not necessarily always everyone else's. And so, it's great that, we have these like justice oriented, let's like screw the fiat machine value systems, right? Like, economic justice for all value system. It's kind of political for us to a certain extent, or apolitical, depending on who you define that. But I think we have to sort of understand that if we really want mainstream adoption, that's not everyone's value system and that's not what everyone cares to do with their spare time. Right. And kind of think about ways to make Bitcoin accessible and interesting for lots of different people who care about lots of different things. And one thing that people care about is art, right? Art, community, having fun. These are things that Ethereum NFT communities do really, really well, right? They have really perfected this vibe, if you will. And I think it's exciting that vibe is now kind of happening in Bitcoin, or at least an option in Bitcoin. You don't need to participate in it, right? Hardcore Bitcoiners who don't want to go there don't need to participate, but it's available now, right? And sort of making Bitcoin interesting to different types of groups, different types of cultures, people with different types of value systems is ultimately how we're going to change, how we're going to increase adoption over time.
Do you think that speculation plays a role?
For sure. And that is complicated. I struggle with that personally every day. It's like gambling, right? Like gambling, there are folks who like to gamble. It is a great American pastime, for better or for worse, right? And yeah, I think that's really hard. I think I've sort of come to the point right now where I sort of fall into a little bit, I guess, of the sort of like libertarian point of view where I feel that, gambling is totally fine. Let the casinos run as long as you are being transparent that they are casinos and as long as you are not lying or deceiving to people about what they are doing and as long as you are practicing ethical marketing, which unfortunately we don't see a ton of in traditional NFT Ethereum communities. And we don't necessarily see, Ordinals is not going to be different, right? Like we're going to have the same challenges in terms of conscious communication with consumers and consumer protection with inscriptions and Ordinals as we did with traditional NFTs. And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge. It's a real problem. So that's sort of my point of view about that. I think also just being sensitive to speculation and gambling as sort of something that can come with different kinds of mental health risks. That's not something we hear a lot about in the crypto community, but I think that that's very true, right? Like a lot of people get into crypto and gambling more broadly, because of have serious mental health challenges around it. And that's something I wish we talked about more. I think we could be having better conversations and having, there could be better education happening around this issue of speculation and how it affects retail investors.
Agreed.
But yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that is a challenge.
I haven't heard the term gambling used in that context, and you're so right about that. Yeah. So you talked about the power of social media in the impetus of this story. Like this was kind of a swell that was happening in Discord and Twitter, and then that tweet you used towards this pitch. Talk about what Twitter looked like after these placements started happening. What role did social media play in this story?
Social media was really like the true queen of the story. It was really the true, and I would say Twitter and Discord in particular. I think arguably Discord was the real where the real magic was happening in terms of building this community. And that was something that was a social media platform that I had no experience with personally before getting into Ordinals. I was not really familiar or engaged with Discord at all. And it is really, I think, where the heartbeat of a lot of certainly Ordinals, inscriptions related community is happening. But what I'm learning is that it's really the heartbeat of where a lot of NFT and crypto communication is happening more broadly. Bitcoiners, right, like hardcore hodling maxis, they don't use Discord as much, right? I mean, there's not as much of a reason. But certainly when you're in the NFT inscription Ordinals universe, Discord is a huge, huge deal. Like that is the primary way that collections are marketing their work. And that's been really exciting to learn about because, again, I had no experience with Discord at all going into this project.
Did you become the community manager for the Discord channel?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't be qualified for that. Oh my God. Yeah, no, I would not be able to do that. I mean, Discord is actually pretty complex. I mean, we had to, Charlie Spears, who is, now also like kind of is proper Ordfluencer in his own right. He works for Ordinal Hub, which is owned by Luxor today. He and his wife, Lauren, were running the Ordinals Discord. So, they were early participants in the Discord, and Casey kind of took notice of them and sort of their active participation. They had strong experience, years and years of experience with Discord, right? They're sort of like Discord experts. There's no way that I would have been able to even handle that or touch that at all. Like Discord is really something where you kind of have to be native and really understand it. Just like any social media platform. But I would say that's been particularly, especially true for Discord, as Discord's kind of a little bit more, there's a lot of complexity to Discord and managing Discord. So we were very lucky to have Charlie, who is, proper Discord expert and also now high-end Ordinal expert as well. So that was great.
Did you work hand in hand with them on the comms and messaging, like the high level strategy?
Yeah, we did. I mean, so there was a lot of it was, there was a lot of fingers in the pie in terms of, communication between me and Casey and them and Casey, right? But yeah, we were certainly all, working together and communicating regularly. We certainly, absolutely worked closely together around how things should be messaged and how we wanted things to be messaged. We were certainly, a team. But ultimately, Casey had kind of the final word on how he wanted things to be communicated, which was also largely cultural choices by Casey, right? Choices about Casey's personal ethics around this stuff and personal point of view around this stuff. He wanted to be, pretty clear that we are Bitcoiners. And, I think that he was very, very concerned about things like consumer protection. He really brought his personal value system to the communication strategy from day one. And that really guided everyone, beneath him.
such an interesting story. It really and also the timeline in which all parties just rallied and got involved is pretty mind-boggling, but a testament to Casey, to you, to all the team members involved for jumping right in with 2 feet and making this thing happen. And now it's really got a life of its own. Can you touch a little bit about, we've talked about this offline, but like this Bitcoin renaissance now that's happening. I mean, Ordinals is one thing, this technological breakthrough on top of Bitcoin, but what's happening now? Where are we today?
Yeah, I think that, Ordinals sort of sparked this new interest in Bitcoin, not just as like a savings technology, but as a technology, as a database upon which different technologies can grow and you can potentially do lots of different things. I think hardcore Bitcoin dev types would say that that's always been true, but that certainly wasn't the perception of Bitcoin until probably Ordinals came along. Maybe in the early days of Bitcoin, that was the perception of Bitcoin, but certainly like in a post-Ethereum world, that has not been the perception of Bitcoin until Ordinals came along and kind of turned the whole narrative that you can't do anything with Bitcoin other than money on its head, right? This idea that Bitcoin is just for money has been completely dismantled by Ordinals, and it's been forever changed by Ordinals. And so the sort of discovery of Ordinals, if you want to call it that, has opened up this new curiosity about what is possible on Bitcoin that maybe we weren't thinking about before or we weren't looking for. And it has opened up a wide range of conversations around things like smart contracts on Bitcoin. I'm thinking particularly about DLCs, which were sort of like I think the original DLC white paper was written by someone from MIT in like 2017. It was like how you could create smart contracts natively on Bitcoin using Bitcoin script. That was, being talked about in academic circles in 2017, but no one really was enabling it or executing it. Now you have multiple companies that are diving in and really, moving forward with executing DLCs, which are effectively smart contracts on Bitcoin, right? So that's another really a good example of like these types of companies are getting a lot more interest in a post-Ordinals universe, right? All of a sudden, everyone's talking about what's possible with Bitcoin. If the NFT market collapses onto Ordinals, right, and Ethereum NFTs become less and less relevant because now you can put NFTs on a more decentralized, more immutable, more government-resistant chain, then what else could potentially collapse onto Bitcoin? Or what potentially could Bitcoin take market share from Ethereum around? And I think smart contracts it's like we're right there, like it's on the way. So this is very, very exciting time for Bitcoin. The Bitcoin builders renaissance is sort of, I think what I've heard some folks call it. I definitely didn't coin that. And you see a lot of investment interest in those things as well. You see, funds coming up around these themes, right? These Bitcoin topics, I guess. And people just getting more and more excited about what's possible on Bitcoin for the first time in a long time.
What advice once you found Bitcoin, found your journey into working in it professionally, what advice do you have for others that are looking to do the same? If you have any advice there or resources or things that you recommend to people?
Honestly, my advice is to go to in-person events and meet people IRL. Maybe that's like not everyone's game. I think it depends. You also have to like know what you are good at and like how you connect with people. But everything about when it comes to getting jobs, everything is relationships, right? And breaking into any new industry, I think the most important part of that is building relationships. And so think about how you build relationships. What's your sort of relational style? And figure out, okay, how can I use this to my advantage to build relationships in this new industry? For me, IRL relationships is like the best possible case scenario. That's where I really thrive. But even phone, video chats, I get on the phone with folks who are like NIMS who would never go to a conference. And I'm like, let's get on the phone. Let's do whatever I can to increase the value of this connection, right? Like there's something about heightened levels of connection on phone, video, IRL, whatever the highest level of connection you can make with someone is, the highest value of connection you can make with someone. Take advantage of trying to build those relationships because that is that's how companies get formed, right? That's how teams are made, right? And so that's my number one piece of advice is just, start making relationships with people, even if it's just like people on Twitter.
That's such good advice. And that's actually how we were introduced, because I met someone in real life that knows you in real life and then connected the two of us. And we've since had multiple video chats. And I feel like we know each other in real life. But you're right, that connection is so important. And it is the foundation of all of these kind of business relationships.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was such a great conversation. I knew it would be. Really appreciate all your insights. Congratulations on the success of the launch and your part in all of it. Do you have any closing thoughts as we wrap things up?
No, this was so fun. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of the story. It's been like the ride of my life. So it's really fun to kind of like look back and tell it. So thanks, Kelley.
Thanks for tuning in to Proof of PR. This episode was brought to you by Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy for Bitcoin and Web3 innovators. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen today. To stay up to date on upcoming guests and news, visit proofofpr.com or follow us on Twitter @proofofpr. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and hodling.